Welcome to the OnPoint Podcast. Today I'm joined by a true veteran of field medical, Vicky Jones. Now, my friend Vicky brings a wealth of experience from UCB, Lilly, Regeneron, and now she's leading global field medical at Annexon. You're going to love our conversation as we dive deep into what it takes to build a highly effective field medical team. We start by defining what effective actually even means, because if you don't know that, how do you know what you're building for? Then we explore how to attract the right people, get them productive quickly, and most importantly, retain top talent. With companies implementing return to office mandates, while the MSL role remains inherently field-based, retention strategies have never been more critical. Vicky and I unpack this challenge and more. So stick around, it's going to be a great conversation. Welcome to OnPoint, the Medical Excellence Podcast, where we talk to pharma leaders about how to build highly effective medical affairs organizations. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the OnPoint Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Thompson with Acceleration Point. And today, I am so excited to have my friend. I've known you for, 5-6 years, maybe?
I think so.
A very experienced head of field medical. Currently global head of field medical at Annexon Biosciences. And we've known each other for a while, but you have spent time in MSL and MSL leadership roles at Amgen, UCB, Eli Lilly, and of course, Regeneron for the last bit of time, mostly recently in the ophthalmology space. And, what I'm really excited about is in this conversation, everybody's going to get to see how passionate Vicky is about field medical, the value it can bring to both the medical community and to the organizations they work in. And we're going to jump deep in how to build an effective MSL team. So with that, Vicky, welcome to the OnPoint Podcast.
Thank you, Scott. Thrilled to be here.
I'm so excited. So maybe before we get into building a team, you actually went to school just down the street here at Virginia Tech and did some time in veterinary medicine. How did you find your way into field medical? Where did that start from?
It's such a common question that I get when people see my degree as a veterinarian and they pause for a minute and they go, wait, how are you here? And it was a, interesting journey. I'm sure most of us have a, everybody takes a different path, right, to get there. And so I was practicing small animal medicine. I did emergency medicine. And when I was doing emergency medicine, I did some extra work on the side with SIBA Animal Health, which is now Novartis. Mm-hmm. And I was helping them 1 or 2 days a week doing off-label usage and adverse drug experience reporting to the FDA. And it gave me a little taste of industry, what it was like. What I tell people is after doing emergency medicine for several years, it was nice. No one cried, died, bit me, or peed on me. So these were all good things, right? And so at the same time, I was doing a little bit of consulting with Dale Carnegie training. And, people think about Dale Carnegie and they think it's so old-fashioned sometimes, but it's timeless. It's just tenets that you can live by that just they're as valid as they were 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I did some work there and met someone I went through instructor training with that worked for Merck at the time, and he said to me, "You got to go human. Like you're someone, your personality, your passion, you would do well in the pharmaceutical world." And he helped me put my cover letter and resume together. I answered one of those cattle call ads back in the late 90s. Now I'm showing my age. And I was actually on the commercial side initially. I was a sales rep. I was a specialty sales rep and then a district manager, and then eventually put the doctorate back to work and moved over into the medical affairs side, where I've been for many, many years and absolutely love it.
Fantastic. Well, when we first talked about spending some time online together, sharing kind of this story, you were really passionate about sharing the importance of having a plan when putting together a field medical team.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you so attracted to this? Why field medical in particular?
I think I have a natural love of teaching and training. I think a lot of what field medical does is teaching and training. We're sharing information, scientific exchange, which can take so many forms. So there's a natural passion that exists there. And I found over the years, leading lots of different projects, whether it was congresses, a variety of things that I sort of naturally mentored other people on my team. And over time, it just evolved into stepping into those roles more frequently. And then, eventually the time was right to move into an official leadership capacity. And so far, I haven't looked back.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to dig into how to structure an MSL team, who you're looking for, how to find those people, how to help them be productive. But I think an important place for us to start is if we're going to talk about building an effective team, an effective field team, we should start with what that even means. Like, what is that role of field medical? And because I know it's changing over the years. And so maybe if we just start, like, what do you see as like the core purpose? Why field medical even exists?
It's a great first question. I think we exist. We're the medical face of the company, right? We're kind of on the tip of the spear, so to speak, and we're that conduit of information in and out of the company. And each direction is equally important. It's important what we carry out to the community, what our topics of education are, whether disease state, mechanism of action, all those things. But it's equally important what we bring back in. Our currency, I think, is insights, right? You and I have worked together many times on a variety of insights projects. How to create the right questions, how to package it up, how to disseminate it. Each step of that is so important. And I think in today's environment, with these companies, budgets are more critical than ever. They're looking at their spend. They're looking at the value of what it is that you're bringing to the table. And I think we've all been in situations, where we hear what's field medical doing? Not always in a positive way. And the better that we can be at communicating our value in today's environment, the better off the team will be. Budgets, headcount, all those things will flow if we become very adept at showing what we're delivering.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I'd love, can you share maybe a story about something that came from that exchange, either a way that you impacted the medical community or your team did, or something that you learned and how it changed your organization?
Oh my gosh, there's so many from over the years, where something that we've heard when we've brought it in. An example could be a need for more education in a certain spot. So, without being too specific, with a previous product, in conversations, we uncovered there was an unfounded fear of a certain event happening. And we were able to bring that back, share it with our commercial counterparts, because face it, as field medical, we're dealing with maybe 5%, 10%, depending on the size of your specialty, really dealing with so many physicians. So being able to uncover something like that, bring it back, share it with your commercial colleagues that can then go out more broadly and address it, and maybe prevent it from getting beyond where it already was, and kind of put an unnecessary fire out before it really, got out of hand.
Absolutely. And, I know it's hard to share specific examples, but I can say, it's been really fun to watch kind of the three different things that you've done with insights, discovering new signals, things that we might not have heard about before and then need to go explore, some things that we knew but we didn't understand, and you were being very direct about, hey, we need to go get information on this because we need to make decisions.
Yeah.
And then tracking kind of how, you talked about like the education, the understanding of your science and the belief around it, how that's changing over time. And it's been
Mhm.
really fun to watch your team start to stand behind those changes as the reason that they're out there engaging.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think one of the things that you just mentioned is really critical. Watching that change over time, being able to document that change over
Mm.
time, taking the pulse, like, and depending on and what stage you're at, if you're in a launch stage, a pre-market stage, doesn't matter. Getting a pulse on the marketplace, on the mindset of the physician,
Mhm.
and then being able to measure your team's impact over time goes so far in demonstrating value, and knowing how you've moved the needle on advocacy, on comfort, uh, any number of parameters that can be measured.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit about just here about the product life cycle, and how do you see the role of an MSL changing like well before a product launch, during, and then for a more mature product?
Yeah, yeah, and it really does change, right? So, pre-market, it can be a focus, particularly on education around mechanism of action, for example. Maybe hopefully it's a new mechanism of action. Makes it a lot more fun and interesting. And you see, when it is something new, the physicians lean in, and it just you see the energy level of the whole team rise with that, right? That ability to that there's just such a more exciting, exchange that takes place, and the team is so much happier, going out. Depending on the company, I think trial support is a huge part of the pre-market environment. Some companies, MSLs are not quite as involved in that. I've been fortunate. I've worked with a number of companies where we were very much involved, and I think that's, truly an MSL favorite activity. And I always think because it's a little more tangible, so much of what we do exists here. Yeah. So to speak, like you can't, it gets a little harder sometimes to measure. And I think trial support is just so tangible. We see those numbers, we see the patients come through, and we finally get to the point of, creating data. And so, but yeah, I think the education, again, much more focused on disease state awareness, that type of thing. And also market and competitor insights. Who's already out there? What are they doing? How's it being received? What pitfalls do we need to be aware of as we move forward? Where are opportunities? Yeah, that pre-market stage, I think it's a rare and special time in a product life cycle, in a company stage. It's, I love it. It's one of my favorite times. Launch is a close second, I think. That's go time, right? That's when the show starts, so to speak. There's such a ramp up around that. Here again, insights I think are so valuable in this time, and the frequency of your insights. It may be daily, at wait that we're turning around reports. This is what we're hearing. This is what happened. This is the experience they're having. Here's something we didn't anticipate. Now we have a new unanswered question. So daily, weekly, whatever it might be, we probably see, now we've got a commercial team out there with us. There's the need for support for them. I think you see an uptick in your unsolicited requests for information. You're engaging now with a lot more people that maybe you didn't engage with before, where you were focused just on your trial sites and, your very top tier thought leaders. It's I think really important, really critical that you've anticipated, a lot of these challenges, that you have a detailed launch plan, and that you're executing against, and it just prevents so much uncertainty for the team. They know exactly what the marching orders are. And then when you have a maturing product, that's a whole different situation too. And just as challenging. The focus is going to shift. Maybe if that new exciting data becomes a little more scarce now, keeping the experts engaged, and you may find yourself full circle back to talking about disease state, and how maybe the therapeutic area is changing, how it's evolving, and staying relevant and valuable to that expert so that you continue to be a welcome guest in their
Yeah.
clinic. That's important.
Very cool. I guess one other difference I'd love to, because you've got this experience across different size pharmas, right? I mean, you've got giant pharma, you've had mid-size, and now tell everybody just about kind of your current challenge that you're walking into.
So I've gone from, a pretty big experienced biotech to a little tiny company. I think I'm employee 102. So, it's very, very different. And it's fun in that I think, the bigger the company, the smaller your swim lane, right?
Mhm.
And I've been in very large companies that I used to laugh and say, if you had a good idea, chances are they already had a whole department that did that,
Sure.
because they were just so well resourced. We're not that. So, and it's fun and it's challenging because it's this all hands on deck environment. My boss was ordering the table skirts for a display because no one else had done it, and we needed table skirts to put at our little tiny medical affairs booth that we were gonna have. It's just you just do what needs to be done,
That's so
and
fun.
I find it really fun and really engaging.
Yeah. Well, the energy is certainly different in a startup. I've worked in huge companies and tens of thousands, and then I was employee number one of my own company, and right, and it's a very different energy, and you get this freedom to try so many things. And so as we get into kind of who we're looking for, I'd love to keep in mind like who are we looking for? Is it different in these different situations that we talked about?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so let's just maybe you kind of covered a number of different factors, right? Product life cycle, therapeutic area, size of company, lots of different factors. How does that uh, impact how you think about a MSL team should be structured and the kind of the size of that team of what's needed?
Yeah, there's so many variables that go into that, right? Because, initially it may be, what the budget is. You may be handed a head count that you don't get to negotiate. Here's what you have. I was handed a small head count. That's what I have for right now. So I have to make it work. So that as I look at who I might bring in, that's a little bit different than, say, the last company where I was expanding a well-established and well-experienced team. And I think in that setting, I could take a little more risk on someone. It wasn't as critical that they have the exact therapeutic background. I mean, it's always preferable if they can come with, solid relationships and all that kind of thing. But um, I had the luxury of time, being able to take, 3 months or more to onboard them and make sure they were ready to walk out into the marketplace. Versus say where I am now, where it's critical. It's critical that they have that therapeutic area background because I've hired them and I pushed them into the deep end of the pool and said, go, here's what we've got to do. So I think it can be very different. And then you think about the size of the market, how many specialists are in this therapeutic area, and they're a tiny, the one that I'm in now has a little over 3,000. So that's a smaller need than you're walking into oncology, and there are reams of them out there. So I think that does it. Sometimes having a knowledge even of the accessibility of that therapeutic area, you may not need as many just because it's not very accessible. And whether it's a saturated market, I think, versus a new market. So, like, I think about, say, rheumatology, And there's a zillion biologics now. That's a saturated market, right? Versus something that's new and different that, we're just coming into, and there's maybe more opportunity there. And then that, I think too, I'm very risk-minded in terms of, sometimes you see companies build these huge teams and they haven't got their phase 3 data yet. And then these huge teams get laid off. And, nobody wants to go through that. And so it's weighing, how many do I absolutely need versus, what's my risk here? And just being mindful of that. And then I think too, company strategy, right? Is the company strategy, do we want to only engage with our very top tier experts? Do we want to engage just with our trial sites? What's our strategy going out there? And that can help you determine how many you need as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I'm listening to this, right, it kind of goes back to that triangle of the scope of what you want me to work on, how much of it you want me to do, and how many resources I have. And if you tell me 2 of those, I'll tell you what the third one is.
Exactly. I can fill in the blank. I can do the math one way or another. Yeah, exactly.
As you're kind of thinking about that team, you had said that, as the life cycle changes or as the team is evolving, you might set different priorities for that MSL team. Generally speaking, like what would you say? Because I see it changing. I'd love to get your perspective on, everybody kind of thinks of the traditional KOL engagement, top 30 people, 40 people, something like that in your territory. How much focus do you put on that versus educating people who are treating patients, engaging in digital opinion leader work, in working with study sites and finding people who generate data? Like, what are the things that go into that priority list?
There's, again, so many variables, and I think your triangle plays right into this as well. It's what you have versus what the priority is. And it's so critical that the field medical leader is plugged in with senior leadership, medical leadership, commercial, that you hear, what their priorities are so that you can kind of make those your own. Anticipating big events. Do you have a label update coming up? Do you have a press release? Do you have some launch? And then, like I said, planning out ahead for those things. And then using our own insights to help shape that strategy as well. And maybe in this particular disease state, maybe it is more important that we're out there talking to that community physician who's in the trenches treating their patients, versus just being focused on those top 30. Like you said, I think it depends on where you find yourself. And again, the resources that you have, where sometimes you have to make hard decisions about, there are this many hours, right, in the week, and I can only go so many places. Here's where I'm going to focus first, where I can make the biggest impact.
Yeah. Something you just mentioned, I'd love to double click on here.
Okay.
So you talked about kind of your brand strategy, brand priorities. A lot of field medical leaders, especially when they're first entering into the leadership role, find themselves unsure about what that relationship should be with commercial, right? And how much direction and how much collaboration and like, can we be here to serve a commercial purpose or not? What advice do you have for those folks?
As I said, I started on the commercial side, and I'm really glad that I did, because I feel like it gave me such a good perspective. I have walked a mile in their shoes. I know what it's like to answer to a number. There's sometimes a sense of urgency that is felt differently on the commercial side than it is on the medical side. So I think having an appreciation for that, and because I started there, I will always have, a soft spot for my commercial colleagues. And I think it's important to find a path forward. A compliant path, of course. But to be able to say, okay, we can't do that. Let's figure out how we can help solve whatever your issue. But what I think is most important, and one of the biggest misconceptions that sometimes, whether it's commercial or whoever has about field medical, we are not the long arm of sales. We are not there to fix your high prescriber problem. Please don't call me and say, Dr. So-and-so is using so much fill in the blank competitor product. Can you go talk to him? No,
Right.
no, I can't. No, I can't. I can't do that. That's your job. So, but it's being empathetic at the same time to the struggle that they're facing, and maybe offering some coaching, some things to think about that could be helpful to them. I think at a higher level, high level strategy is fine. Those discussions are fine. Being aware of what the other group is doing so that you don't seem disjointed as a company is very important. And then the guardrails, of course, have to apply. There can't be group interactions, group discussion. We can never, if we want to weaken, the field medical role, it is to be seen as being commercially motivated. We can never give that appearance.
Yeah. And I think that it goes beyond the compliance and legal piece. It becomes an effectiveness issue, right? If we start to head down that path, we lose the trust and the relationship to do the things we're actually here to do.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That is it exactly. You have to, tread with caution, but with empathy.
Yeah. Wonderful. So let's now transition to, you've got a team that you're going to build. Maybe it's an existing team and you're filling some spots, or you're starting from scratch. Let's start with what makes a really good MSL. Okay, if you're out there looking, and there's going to be some generics that work everywhere, some foundations, and then there might be some specialties. But let's start with like the formula for success. What's your foundation that you need to look for?
Oh my gosh. There's a number of attributes that I look at. I don't know that there's one thing above any else, but there's a number of, key components to it. Adaptability, resourcefulness, resilience, simple presence. How do they present themselves? There's so many different things I think that we look for. And I think it also, again, we talked about a few minutes ago, it depends on where you are too,
Sure.
as a company, and but I think it's dangerous sometimes to think about there's this one perfect, MSL type that's out there, because the beauty of a team is building something that has, many facets to it, and that has many backgrounds. Everybody brings something a little different to the table. And I don't want to have a team where everybody's exactly the same, because you need that different perspective.
But let's dig into that, because oftentimes we see the MSL as an individual contributor role out there, running their, in their own territory with their own HCPs, doing their own thing. But you're seeing that you want a blend of backgrounds because they interact. Just talk about how that works.
I think it's very different how different backgrounds can look at an issue. And, whether you're an MD, a PhD, I think those two, they have very different perspectives. The PhD may think about things from a molecular basis. The MD often is looking at the whole picture. I'm a DVN. I tend to look at the whole animal, which is a human in this case. But so I'm more of that big picture person. I can remember working at a company where I had a partner, and we were in oncology, and she was a PhD in cancer biology, and here I am, a DVM, and we were like the perfect partners. She thought about things in a way that never would have occurred to me. I just didn't think at that level. And so I think it can be so complementary, and it can strengthen the team when you have people that bring those different perspectives to the table.
Wonderful. Sometimes it's harder to explain what you are looking for than the things you're not. What are the red flags? Right? When you see somebody and you go, nope, that's just not going to
That's
work.
not it. That's not
Yeah,
it.
what are some of those?
And it's interesting because we all lived through a pandemic, right? And we had to do some hiring tactics during that time that I wouldn't do again. I had to at the time there was no in-person interviewing, and I think it's just critical to do live interviews. And I know not every company has gone back to that. I struggle. I feel like you need to spend time in a room with someone live in person. Ideally, you want to see their presentation. Can they think on their feet? Because I think it's very easy, like even you and I sitting here virtually talking, it's a much less pressure environment than if we were up on stage at a conference, right? And again, we would see different skills emerge for both of us in that environment versus this environment. So I think having the person spend the day with a variety of colleagues, peers, cross-functional colleagues, medical directors, whoever it may be, and then having as many people as possible attend their presentation. And just for kicks and giggles, let's have a virtual component too. Let's have some of our colleagues dial into Teams and some of our colleagues in the room, and can they handle the shift back and forth? Can they answer their questions? If they get a question and they don't know the answer, that's just as important. How do they handle that? What happens afterwards? People, I think, can hold it together to get through a 30-minute interview, which I'm not a fan of. I feel like interviews need to be longer. But they can hold it together. They can get through the 30-minute virtual presentation. You can have all their notes, scattered in front of them that you'll never see. But being able to kind of survive the whole day with a variety of people, you're going to have a much better understanding of who they are at the end of that day, and just how they're going to fit into the team. Are they the right fit? Do they, and what kind of questions did they ask? Also important. It's funny there. The longer I do this, of course, the more questions I come up with that are my kind of like weeding them out. So one of the ones I like to ask now, once maybe we're halfway through the interview, everybody's comfortable in talking now, I want them to tell me about their worst travel story. So the reason I want to hear that is to see how they manage adversity. Maybe how they treat other people with kindness and compassion, or do they get in someone's face? Are they, maybe a little ugly to service personnel? I think there's a lot you can learn about somebody's resilience and personality, entitlement, whatever, by finding out, like when things went really wrong on a trip, how did you handle it? And it's one of those topics that people like warm to, and they kind of let their guard down a little bit. And you find yourself back in the emotion of that time. So I think it can be an insightful question, ask at the right time. And now, of course, anybody that interviews has watched this will know, but that's one that I like. Another one that I like is I ask them to tell me what their favorite part of being an MSL is, and let them talk about that. And then I ask them, what's your least favorite part? What do you wish wasn't part of this? And I think that can be insightful as well. Is this a person that's never going to turn in an expense report or record an interaction? So little things like that, I think can be helpful. So, and then I think the final thing, and this is a little more general, but I think it's really important to ask them the situational questions with a specific example, because it's easy to say in theory, this is what I would do. Tell me what you've done and how did it turn out? And, um, and letting them tell you the story and then maybe having 3 more questions.
Ready to go. Yeah, I'm a big fan of, how you used to do things is a great predictor of how you will do things. And even better, using your simulations and why, it's so important to spend a day with somebody, if not more, is how you do things today is even a better predictor of how you're going to do.
Exactly.
Right? Absolutely. So let's say now you've hired your MSLs, new hires come on board. What do you do to help them get up to speed quickly? Because I know companies now, like there's no patience for 6 months. I'm still learning the science, right? So what do you do in the first 30, 60, 90 days?
I think the first 30, if you have the luxury of time, if you have the luxury of a 3-month onboarding, that first 30 days, you're learning the company, you're getting all your health insurance set up, you're doing the 80 SOPs that are now required of every company, right? That you've got to read through and certify, and the trainings that don't even let you go through quickly, that you have to wait and click each thing, that it's going to take a minute to get through all of that. And you're introducing the foundation, of course, depending on their therapeutic area background, how foundational you have to be. And someone maybe that's more experienced, that comes from the same therapeutic area, has been maybe even competing against you. So maybe they already know your data pretty well. You can maybe speed through that process a little bit more. And then I think, the next 30 days, you're really digging deep into the therapeutic area and into the data. It's really a focus. It's spending a lot of time with the trainer, a lot of time reading, a lot of time verbalizing. I think that's one of the areas in the past that I don't think, as a leader, I focused on as much as I should have. And I think, one of the biggest mistakes sometimes that can be made onboarding is making assumptions. I think one of my biggest lessons as a leader was thinking everybody works the same way you do, either as motivated or is going to just approach it the same way you will, which is, of course, silly. Absolutely not true. So there has to be some checks and balances in there to ensure that what you're serving up is actually being taken in. And when they are out there in the wild, so to speak, that they can stand and deliver, that they can engage in the scientific exchange that you think they can, because it may not be quite there. And so having, and this is an area where you can involve the team, having them practice with their peers, having small verbalization groups, any number of things, so that when they get to their final checkout presentation, they've got a good amount of comfort. It's not the first time that they're verbalizing this to an audience. So, and then I think those, the last 30 days of that 90-day period, you're fine tuning, you're kind of adding in the ancillary, you start it with maybe the history of that therapeutic area. You've taken them through, this is what the landscape is now. Now, you look at pipeline, here's what's coming, here's what else we may be dealing with. And you're starting to introduce them now to their territory, helping them develop a territory plan. What are they going to do? Who's most important? The key academic institutions that are in their therapeutic area, starting to learn that, sending them out, because nothing's worse when you're a field-based person and you're used to being out. Nothing's worse than spending at least 90 days at home studying. Nobody wants to do that. So making sure that you're getting them out with some of your key folks on your team, whether it be, if you're lucky enough to have a big enough team that you have a designated trainer, you're spending some time there. Hopefully there's been maybe a congress or two. They've been able to go to that and kind of start, they can sit in on some interactions with some of their colleagues, So letting them kind of get their toe in the water, so to speak, to get out there to engage a little bit in a safe space, before they're on their own. And then I think it really takes 6 to 9 months to kind of get out and get through your territory and kind of start to feel like you're like, okay, I'm slowly getting my arms around what you've asked me to do here in this environment. And honestly, I think that every time you change therapeutic areas, it's getting a master's degree. And until you are firing on all cylinders and you can go toe to toe with, it's 2 to 3 years. It's 2 to 3 years. It is the rare person that can step into a role and at the end of 1 year just be killing it. Unless they've had such a, they've come with so much previous experience. But I think, like, we're talking about someone that's new to a therapeutic area, it's a significant investment, right? Of time to that person.
So you're a year in. How do you know if you're on track?
That's a good question. And that's where, it's just key to spending time with them. I know there are some companies that don't do ride-alongs. I don't comprehend this. I feel like you've got to be out there. You've got to see what your team is doing. It's critical. So I think, whether it's you or your regional directors, your trainer, or colleagues, it's someone else that's with them, observing them, and importantly, giving candid feedback. I think the worst disservice we do to our colleagues is not tell the truth, not give them candid feedback. And again, that's one of those things I learned the hard way along the path is I'm not doing anyone any favors. I'm being too nice. And you need to be compassionate and diplomatic, but you've got to be direct and you've got to give people the feedback that they need if they're going to improve. And your high performers want that feedback. They want to know they're the ones always that, you just saw an interaction that was, a symphony and they're like, what can I do better? And so, I think those are sometimes a little harder than the ones where you can think of more things they could do better. So yeah, feed that feedback and checks and balances to let them know how they're doing, how they can improve, provide the resources they need, provide the support that they need, help them along.
I've been in medical affairs for 15 years, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard a field leader, usually a newer one, say, we don't do training. I don't need to provide coaching. They're smart. I hired smart people. They have a terminal degree. They won't take that. It's inappropriate to train and coach.
Yeah.
What would you say to those folks?
Gosh, and the kindest way possible, you might want to reevaluate that strategy because what you think is happening out there is not. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see it firsthand, and I would say emerging from the pandemic and seeing things, you're like, oh my goodness, okay, we have a few things to course correct here.
Yeah.
You can't assume what's happening out there. You have to see it yourself. And you can't, it's the, what is it, Stephen Covey, with sharpening the axe. You can't just mandate. Go out there and get it done and give people none of the resources that they need to do it. You've got to provide a foundation. You have to provide clear expectation. People want to have an idea of what their marching orders are. They want to know just as much that they are achieving their goals, and I think it is that I've seen it. And I've experienced it as an MSL, and it's not satisfying. It's a little frustrating.
I'll ask you a question.
Yeah.
So I'm going to brag on you a little bit here. So I was working with one of your teams. I won't say which one. And you had brought me in to do a workshop. And as we were preparing the workshop, there was a lot of sensitivity to not putting real examples up. We're not going to be able to get them to do role play. There was a lot of sensitivity around that. And then I was with that same team like a year and a half later, and it was all role plays, and everybody's putting their laundry up for inspection. Like everybody, what did you do?
I beat them. No. No, you know what? It was a continuum. And I think we had come from a place where that just hadn't been embraced. Wasn't felt to be necessary. And again, I mentioned my Dale Carnegie background, right? And it's critical. And I think I maybe was finally able to convince them. And sometimes pain is the best teacher, right? That where do you want to stumble? Do you want it to be in front of the physician where you've only got that one chance? Or do you want it to be in this safe space with your colleagues where, we can work through it and prepare you? And then you can go out there and just be in such a better position to really do the deep dive. And I think too, I forced them to really think about times they had been in a situation where they were as confident as they could have been, and they dodged the question. And they could have done the deep dive in, but they didn't have what they needed. They weren't quite ready, and they dodged it. And they missed an opportunity. And I think everybody knows that feeling. And again, it's not satisfying. It's not, dang it, I could have, you think of like the 8 things you could have said afterwards, right? Well, why not think of those 8 things when we're practicing? Why not have them ready? Why not have said them enough times that now it flows and it feels good? And instead of dodging, you engage full force. You are there, and the physician, I guess, will have such a respect for you as an MSL that you're confident in what you're doing, and you're truly engaging in a peer-to-peer discussion. It just, okay, this is funny. So this is a veterinary school example, and I had a large animal professor at one point, Dr. Welker, and he would say, you can walk up to the cow smiling, or you can walk up to the cow frowning, and the difference is preparation. And, that many more years than I care to admit later, I have never forgotten that. I can still picture him saying it, and it's true. Preparation, it's just, it's the difference between a good day and a bad day.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's turn topics around MSL engagement and retention. One of the things that I find is that the MSL role is amazing. I mean, you get to do really cool stuff, right? You get to talk science with cool people. It's fairly well compensated. You are typically remote, get to live where you want to live. But a lot of companies, especially with this return to the office mandate, it limits options for MSLs, and they end up having to leave to go to other places. How do you kind of help MSLs grow that career path in that situation?
Yeah. It's challenging. I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. It's a challenging situation, and you're right. There are companies, and I think especially the larger companies, that it is returned to office, and for any number of reasons. I had something I think you pointed out to me recently, that the companies may be asking the employees to come back because of tax reasons, tax advantages that they might have been granted by the municipalities that they're in, not just because they're being mean, unfeeling jerks that are demanding everybody fill up the office space. There may be real reasons behind it. Regardless, the employee, the MSL, is still impacted by it. And I think you can try your best, right, to keep people engaged. I think there's any number of ways. Projects are always good, especially, high visibility projects where people can really step up and engage in something. Being a study lead, people always want to be study leads. It's a juicy project, and you get to develop leadership and leadership without authority, project management skills. There's so much that you get to do in that role, but sometimes they're just not there. Those opportunities, and that's when I think you can kind of create some, bringing people alongside you, having them engage in, maybe they're the person that's leading those verbalization exercises. They're gaining that type of experience. Um, or giving somebody a role. Sometimes as the company evolves, it gets bigger, you can create more roles. I've been able to create some roles that have taken people so that were doing fine in their job, but now they had the opportunity to step into something that was bigger, and they just blossomed in it. They were coasting, and now they had the opportunity to really use more of their brain and their problem solving skills and engage with cross functional colleagues, and they loved it, and they're super happy now doing what they're doing. Doesn't always work out that way. And sometimes, and I'll be candid with people, we may be providing you with these opportunities and building these skills in you, and some other company is going to get the benefit of it. And we recognize that, but we're going to do it anyway because it's the right thing to do for you in your career. I think you have to accept that at some level. Depending on where you are, you may not have what that person needs for the next step for them. And that's okay. And you bless them and send them on their way with good fortune.
I love it's the right thing to do. And it's the old adage, right? That what if we develop them and they leave? And then you think, well, what if we don't and they stay?
Exactly. Like, what is I think there's another Stephen Covey-ism. You're either green and growing or ripe and rotting.
Ooh, yes. It's very perfect. I'm like, that doesn't last very long. It's a very short week.
Right? So, yeah, I want to stay green and growing.
Awesome.
And my team to do that too.
Yeah, absolutely love it. I want to dig into one thing. So you have had some absolutely phenomenal number twos, right? The people that you lean on, that have grown, that are leaders on the team, that succeed you when you leave. How do you go about building a great number two?
Oh my gosh. I think there's a couple of things. First of all, I think one of the most important things as a leader is, gosh, be smart enough to hire people smarter than you are, right? I have been so fortunate to make some really good hires along the way, and to bring in some outside talent too. As great as it is to develop inside talent, sometimes you do need to bring in that outside talent, and it's just what the team needed. So it's being able, I think, to recognize, okay, here are our gaps. This is what we need. I don't think it exists here. I've looked at everybody, and I don't think we have that skill set. Okay, now I need to go get it and bring it in, and then let them do what they're good at, right? I think that's another thing that happens. Like, you bring in somebody and everybody goes, it's different. Yes, yes, it is. And that's why they're here, because we need it different. So yeah, it's being open to different ideas, having some self-awareness, knowing who you are as a person, what you're good at, where your own gaps are. I mentioned being a big picture person. I'm also, if you've ever seen these, I am sunny yellow. I'm very inspirational. I'm like, let's go do this. It's going to be great, But everybody on my team, a lot of them were blues and greens. They needed detail. How are we going to get there? What's the structure? And so, I had to like stop myself. And that's where having those good, number twos, number threes behind you that support can say, hey, wait a minute. Okay, that's great, but it's really important. Let's slow down. Let's map this out for them. And that's amazing, when everybody clearly understands the path, why we're doing it, what we're doing, that we've actually got a plan. It's so much less uncertainty, dissent, just, it flows so much better,
Right.
and people fall in behind it.
Very good. This has been an amazing conversation. I have a question for you. If you can go back to your first year as a field leader
Mm.
and give yourself advice based on all of your experience, what would you share with yourself?
Gosh, you don't have to know everything. I felt like, initially, okay, I'm in charge. Like, I have the answer. I'm the one that's supposed to have the answer and everything. And I felt like I had to have it immediately. You don't. You don't. Take your time. It's so much better to say, let me give that a little thought and come back to you than to answer in the moment and have to walk it back, because you maybe didn't have all the information, or you hadn't thought about all the potential caveats of whatever this person is bringing up. I think that's one. And so asking for help, I think is so important too. Having mentors, it's just critical. I have a few folks, and they know who they are. They're amazing. They've been in my life for years. Nurture those relationships. Don't get so busy in what you're doing. Don't let the busyness overwhelm you that you don't make time to connect. I had somebody tell me recently, the old saying, like, you can't make new old friends. You've got to take care of those relationships. And it's so important to have them, to have that sounding board. Sometimes, that's outside your company, that, you can kind of remove the personality and the politics, and here's my situation. This is what I'm thinking about. What am I missing? What else should I consider? Having those people, it's so critical. They've been key to my success and to lowering my stress level over the years, to help me through some challenging situations.
Wonderful. Yeah, I agree. I think we're all one person, one conversation away from revelation, right? You just never know where that person's going to come from and what that conversation will be.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Exactly.
well, Vicky, this has been phenomenal. I love that we started with, what field medical even is and what, we're trying to build for, some of the differences in the structure and the size and the responsibilities based on life cycle and size of company and even TA. We jumped into some very key practices of getting to know people before you hire them, spending time with them, putting them in situations so you can see what it is they do, how they do it, and having lots of people weigh in on that.
Yeah.
And to be thinking, how can I bring a team together? Even though these are a team of individuals with their own territories and their own work they have to get done, they work as a team with different perspectives, and they educate and train each other and learn together. And then, as you start to bring people in, you need to give them time to develop and to become field medical experts, and doing that in a safe space allows that to go faster and get better than throwing them out to the wolves.
Exactly.
And then just continuing to give opportunities where you can to expand and grow, because either we're growing or we're rotting. So absolutely love this conversation. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you do next.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.